looking for the enter sign?
Well, there's a portion in the book that has to do with looking for the enter sign, but I thought it was a nice kind of like, what are we really doing when we're coming here? We're looking for somebody to let us in. So we're all looking for the enter sign, hence the name.
Excellent.
The part that has this in it is kind of at the end, so I don't want to give it away.
Got it.
That's what it comes down to.
Got it. So you right, the review of the book says that it's a tale of perseverance, sacrifice, and hope.
Yeah. Isn't it for all of us? Or at least for our parents? Yes. I mean, it wasn't easy. First of all, not an easy decision to leave everything behind. And then all of the hoops and the steps you had to take. So that was tough. Sometimes it did feel like all hope was lost. You were jumping into an abyss. You didn't know what you were going to find at the bottom. Where you were going to end up sometimes was a mystery. Didn't know what was going to happen. And yet we all did it. And here we are. We've all somehow made it.
Exactly. So when did you know? When did you feel the parents were cooking something up, planning to leave? Did you hear them whispering in the kitchen? Were they talking openly about it? All of us have a different story, right?
Yeah, so I think that they were probably whispering at first, and then they started talking more openly about it. I don't think that anybody, I mean, I was only like 10 or 11 when this was all going on. And I don't think that anybody ever sat me down and said, you know what, we've made this decision. We're going to immigrate as a family. What do you think? Nobody really asked me. It was just it was happening. And at first, because there was some connotations and possible consequences that could come with even considering immigration, of course, things were whispered. But in the late 80s, it became this like all-encompassing swirl. It was like a mass exodus. Everybody was leaving. So it was very hard to keep it under wraps anymore. So then, of course, it was more obvious. My mom told me a joke yesterday. She said, 2 Jews are standing on the corner talking, and a third Jew is walking by. And he says, I don't know what y'all are talking about, but yes, you should immigrate. And then it keeps going. So it was kind of like that. So I have a passage if you'd like me to read it as to how
Yes, we would love.
How I actually knew that I was leaving. It's kind of what I was talking about. It's from chapter 4. So I'm going to read it if it's okay with you.
Perfect.
I don't remember exactly when I was told that we were leaving, but it didn't come much as a surprise because for months, the grown-ups would rush to quell any ongoing conversations if I happened to walk in the room, which irritated me to no end. However, if I lingered around corners or outside doors, I would hear words like exit visa, Jewish quota, avir, and I could not ignore that something was going on. Not to mention other people were leaving in droves. There was Nina, my best friend, with her family. Then one of my classmates left out of nowhere the previous month. My other friend Jana and I had honestly no idea how she'd been able to keep that kind of secret. And then Papa, my dad, with his second wife and my 2-year-old half-sister, they were leaving shortly too. They'd already had their going away party. They served beef maxim, baked in the oven with the mayonnaise and the onions, and shish kebabs. I sat at the table with the grown-ups and even tried the spicy tomato sauce served with the shish kebabs. You've got to try the sauce, my father said to his guests. I made it myself and it's nuclear level spicy. I tried it, but I didn't like it. Papa brought me home in the taxi and then went back to his party. I was exhausted, but I do remember bawling into the pillow. I didn't register why at the time, but I think it was because we needed to say goodbye, and this was a big goodbye. But if I'm honest, overall, I wasn't particularly paying attention to the grown-ups goings on. I think I knew for sure we were leaving when I got my ears pierced, completely out of the blue. Earrings had been a pipe dream of mine for years. In 2nd grade, when I returned to school from vacation, I found most of my girlfriends had gotten their ears pierced. And I whined to my mom, all of my friends have their ears pierced, and why can't I get mine? All your friends are not my kids, she answered. And I don't think 8-year-olds need jewelry. And that was that.
So how did you get?
Imagine my surprise. When one lucky day, in all the excitement of our leaving, my mom picked me up from school and took me to the Beauty Institute. My earlobes were special and they warranted this special trip. The Beauty Institute looked like a palace to me with marble steps, wrought iron railing, pretty girls busily walking up and down the stairs in pairs. They could be princesses. I was fascinated. A beautician student in a white smock waved my mother and me into a space behind a frosted glass partition. My earlobes were sprayed, and then the beautician stuck a gun to them, and a pair of gold earrings were inserted. I took that as a sign that we were leaving because from the intel I had gathered from my not so accidental eavesdropping, I happened to know there were some very strict rules as to what we were allowed to bring with us. For example, 1 ring per hand and 1 earring per ear. That was the allowed amount of jewelry. In anticipation of emigrating, my ears were pierced so that I could remove a set of gold earrings from the country. So it's true, I said to myself, and felt all aflutter.
Wow. Wow. So getting your ears pierced told you that something was changing, right?
Right.
All of a sudden, it was it was time to.
It's okay, yeah, because, we were preparing.
So how did you feel about that? How did you feel about leaving? How did you feel about leaving your friends behind, school, things
I mean,
like
I was very, very excited, because it like I said, there was a mass exodus and everybody by the end was talking about it. My parents were talking about it. It was the topic of discussion. There was a lot of things going on, the invitation, visa, this, that. And it was obviously something that was very, very important to my parents, to my family. So I wanted it to happen too. And then everyone else was leaving. Like I said, my best friend left, one of my classmates left, my papa left. And, I really wanted to go too. So I was excited, but I couldn't tell you why. If you asked me, I know why now, why we were leaving, but if you asked me then, I was 11 years old, I couldn't tell you why we were actually leaving. I just knew that we should leave.
So the very first chapter of your book is titled VCRs, Walkman, and
And
Barbies,
that's
right?
why I thought I wanted to go. So,
Right. So,
later on into my adulthood, I already realized that we were going because, political, religious, economic freedom, but back then, was it the late 80s that the curtain started to lift a little bit and you started to get little bits of of the West seeping in. You could see a movie here or there. You started to see some pirated music videos and cartoons. Like I remember they started opening all these cafes. They were called video cafes because nobody, of course, had, we didn't have TV.
right.
Nobody had a VCR, but then these cafes started, they would buy a VCR and they would roll it out like in middle school with the TV and the VCR, and they would play pirated copies of like American movies. And I remember going on a school trip in 5th grade to one of these cafes and they would bring you an ice cream and then you'd watch Tom and Jerry. That was like, blurry and all pirated. And that was huge. So what I wanted is I wanted VCRs and I wanted a Barbie and I wanted a Walkman because we didn't have that, but they had it over there and I was going to have it if I went there.
So many people sometimes criticize our wave of immigration of late 80s, early 90s as колбасная иммиграция, right? That we came for VCRs and Barbies and колбаса.
I mean, the 11-year-olds maybe did.
Right. So many say, well, there's nothing wrong with liking all the luxury and all the opportunities we have in the United States. But how do you feel about that when people say that we really didn't come for our Jewishness? And to
I have never had anybody say that to me. Maybe because I don't know. Maybe because I just don't know people that would. I've never had anyone say that to me. But to people that would say that, I would say, if you
what would
didn't,
you say?
you don't know. You just don't know. You don't know what it was like. You have no idea. Because even though I was just 11, I still remember what it was like. Like I remember that you couldn't discuss certain things. I remember that, you couldn't, and again, this wasn't something that I was aware of necessarily consciously at that time, but as I was growing up and talking to my parents and talking to their friends and everybody, these are things that came to me. So by the time that I was like 35 and I sat down to read 19, was I 35? Yeah. I sat down to read 1984 and I thought, this is not fiction. Like, this is how we live. This is why we left. Forget Kolbasa, like this is why we left. And I said, this is fiction? Yes, for the people in the West, it's fiction. For us, it wasn't fiction. Everything complete with vaporization and thought control and double speak. And, it It's just, so what I'm saying is anybody that would say that has no clue and is not worth arguing with.
Right. So at what point did you know you were somehow different? If not Jewish, then somehow different.
So, like I said, that was a really hard question to answer, as I was telling you before this started, because I don't think that anybody needed to sit down with me and tell me, you know, we are different, we are Jewish, right? And because there was no like religion or religious customs, it's not like I could identify myself that way either. You know, oh, the neighbors down the street do Christmas, but we do Hanukkah. We didn't have that. Everybody did the same thing. But how did I really know? I think um, it just kind of soaks in by osmosis. I have another short passage based to describe that a little bit. Should I read it now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Um, Thinking back, of course, there were signs. Like this one time I told a classmate, I'm a Jew, as a point of interest, as one might declare, I'm a lefty or I'm pigeon-toed. And she stared at me blankly and open-mouthed. And then I asked her if she was Jewish or Russian, and she said, I don't respond to such stupid questions. And I watched her walk away, confused, before going back to play with another friend and forgetting the incident completely until now. And I didn't know the word Jew was a profanity or an insult, and to publicly admit it was a shock, even to an 8-year-old. One time I told my grandmother I wanted to be an actress, and she said, not with your nose. And I said, huh? And she said, nothing, never mind. And I said, no, what? And she said, ну, какая-то зануда. And, you know, getting called a pest was off-putting, but why couldn't I be a movie actress? And finally she said, your nose is shaped wrong, and went back to doing her pancakes or whatever she was doing. And I went to the mirror and I kept looking at my nose this way and that way, wondering what's wrong with it. And I completely missed the fact that this was a very typical anti-Semitic trope. But when you live like that, right, when you're surrounded by these subtle little things, these little hints, the fact that I had to get into a special school, and I got into a special school because there was other Jews there and we had some connections, you know, these things, they soak in by osmosis. Eventually, you know, by the time that I left when I was 11, I knew I was Jewish. I didn't necessarily know what that meant, you know.
So I'm sure very similar to many of our experiences. And you know, the book touches upon all of these things, you know, feeling different, knowing something is happening.
Mhm.
And yeah, and you touched on all of these points. I have to say, I felt like, how did she know? Right, right. We all experience these things, but you describe them so poignantly. So it was quite a pleasure to read. So let's move on in the story. You're ready to leave, right? Uh, what happens? Was it, you know, you get on the plane, you get on the train, you get on the bus? How did that happen?
How did we leave? I mean, everybody did it differently. In our case, we flew through Bratislava, from Leningrad, Bratislava, and then in Bratislava there was a train or a bus that took
Bus,
us
right?
to
Leave a bus.
Vienna. And then in Vienna, we got picked up by there was two groups waiting. One was the highest folks who would take you to the US if that's what you decided to do. And the other was, I thought it was called Jaffe. Um,
Right, Sahnut Jeffy, Jewish Agency for Israel. Right.
so if you said you were going to Israel, you would go with them. At the time that we were going, I think only 5% of people were actually going to Israel, which is a big sticking point with the American government and in terms of like granting refugee status to people, because I don't think there's a lot of refugees that get a choice where they get to go. And I touch upon that in the book as well, and some of the politics of it in the preface. But at the same time, Israel's a tiny country, and the numbers of people leaving at that time were so huge that without the US accepting some or most of them, I don't think Israel could have handled it, because they were.
Was there ever a discussion in your family? Should we go there or should we go there?
There was, when we thought we were going to miss the deadline, I think there was some discussion, and we just, you know, my mom is married to a person that wasn't Jewish, and that isn't Jewish, and we weren't sure how that was going to go. Again, I wasn't too privy to these discussions, but I do remember that it seemed very, very important that we make the deadline and end up in the US. We did have a big mishpucha though, in St. Petersburg, and a lot of those people ended up in Israel and got lost for years until Facebook came around. And then recently, we were able to make some reconnections, and it's been amazing. It was like a stranger with my face type of thing. You know, you look at them and you're like, wow, I recognize that face. And now we're in a Facebook group that has, there's this guy who's making a rodoslovna. He's making like a genealogy book with everyone's story from the family. So that's been kind of nice to reconnect with them. But we are here. I think we're the only ones here, actually.
Interesting. So we have a comment in the chat. Just ordered the book. It's my life. Only my family left in 1988, having been refuseniks for 12 years. So,
Amazing.
right.
So we were not refuseniks. So in the early 80s, my biological father's brother, so my uncle Misha, he immigrated, but my dad was at the time very young. He was like 20, he was very young. He decided not to go, but his uncle went. And then for 10 years after deciding not to go in the first wave, he regretted it. So as soon as it was possible again, they decided to go. And then we ended up going, and it's covered in the book how we're actually both in Italy at the same time, and we end up meeting with my dad, even though he was there with his family and I was there with mine, which is kind of surreal.
Thank you. So here you are.
Yes.
Abroad for the first time.
Yes.
Right. Was it Bratislava that hit you the most, or was it
No,
Vienna?
it was Vienna. I want to read a passage about our arrival in Vienna.
It's quite a bright description of Vienna. Clearly left an impression on you.
Huge impression. It's a little bit longer, so I hope you guys don't mind. So here we are. We've arrived at the Vienna bus station, and this is, I don't want to read the whole chapter because it's just going to be too boring, but basically, I don't know if you guys remember this. They drop you off, and here are these two groups of people that are going to, you know, take your name and take you somewhere. And everybody thinks, they've heard rumors. They heard that they take you to some abandoned hotel in the mountains where they don't feed you. But if you give this guy a bottle of vodka or some caviar, then maybe he'll take you to a nice place. And so we get there to Bratislava, and all these people are lined up to like give these representatives vodka and caviar. And my parents are standing there like, oh my God, we had vodka, but it just seems so embarrassing that they just kind of hung back, and we're like, oh, forget it, whatever, let them take us where they take us. So we were the last people to be loaded onto a small white shuttle van. It was us and another man wearing a knit sweater and a parka and carrying a small briefcase as if he was just going on a weekend trip. He stood aside by himself, eyeing the queue. He clearly also didn't bring vodka or didn't think to get in the bribe line, and thus stood aside waiting. Some awkward introductions took place. Anya, Volodya, Lyova. The van finally stopped in front of a white 4-story building, and we got off. We were led into a small lobby where a proprietor was waiting for us with keys. There were some Russian guys loitering, smoking cigarettes on the steps of a winding staircase. Ah, one of them said. Смотрите, новички, look, they brought more newbies. Welcome new arrivals, said the other one, holding his arms up as if to say, check out our property. They hopped over the bottom steps, whizzed past us, out the door, grabbed the suitcase each, and followed us and the usher upstairs with the keys. Come, come, they said, don't be shy. My parents and I were led into a large room on the 3rd floor. A double bed dominated it. There was also a red pull-out couch for me, a sink in the corner, a fridge, and a kitchen table. Welcome, said the guys from downstairs, and again, see you in the morning. And with a wink, they were gone. And we were alone in our temporary home. My mom set about looking for sheets in the suitcase, shook them out, made the beds. My father figured out how to open the pull-out couch, and I stood watching. It occurred to me that no one told us where we had landed exactly, only that we were newbies and that apparently we would be seeing our new friends from downstairs in the morning. Bedtime, my mother announced, shutting off the lights, and we all fell asleep. The next morning, we woke up in the new world. There was a bit of light coming in through the windows. It was a grayish sort of light that can only exist in cities, where the rays of sunshine are dulled by reflecting off stone buildings and mixing with street dust. I climbed out of bed and looked out the window at the deserted street below. I noticed there were tram tracks right under us. It was early, so there was no tram and not too many cars. However, one thing was clear. The street may have been deserted, but we were not in the mountains lost in the snow. Look, Mom, I said, the sign on that store says Kindermoden. It's probably a kid's clothing shop, she answered. Look, that one says Monda. I wonder what that is. We dressed and brushed our teeth in the sink in the corner. The halls of the place we were staying, what was this place anyway, like a dorm? The halls were deserted. My mom explored outside our room and found a small communal kitchen where she heated up some water and made oatmeal and instant coffee from the stash that we brought with us. The street was coming alive as we went out after breakfast. Well-dressed people were walking out of buildings and marching down the street to what would look like a metro station a few blocks down. A streetcar appeared and rattled down the tracks. On our building, there was a sign that said Wallensteinstrasse. Well, I'll be damned, said Volodya, looking around. Despite not bribing the authorities with vodka, it looked like we had been dropped in the middle of Vienna proper. That first day we walked down our street until we hit some sort of river. What's the river in Vienna? I asked. The Danube, said my parents, like the waltz. So is this the Danube? They looked at each other with expressions that said, is it? Is it? Is this the Danube that we had previously only read about? Is that good?
Yeah, that's quite. So was it the Danube?
No, it turned out to be the Danube Canal, which
Canal,
is,
right.
yeah, it was like this little canal that like goes off the Danube. And if we walked a couple of more blocks ahead, we would have actually seen the Danube, but we were impressed anyway.
Sasha, so you're describing a lot of people that you met along the way who were complete strangers.
Complete strangers.
Complete strangers, but all of a sudden the circumstances put you together. Yep. This feeling of uncertainty, this feeling of, where are we going? What's going to happen to us? And all of a sudden, these people become your friends, even if for a short time. So, could you tell us a little bit about some of the people you've met in Vienna or later? And then, are they in your life? Have you found them because of Facebook? Are you in touch?
Fortunately, no. So it's amazing. They say politics makes strange bedfellows, but I think immigration makes even stranger bedfellows. So, we were in what this place turned out to be where we were is a pension, like a pension. And I think that the owners just kind of rented the rooms to Hayas, and the Hayas would house immigrants there. And it was like a constant tusovka, because everybody was so nervous, everybody was so scared just before leaving, and even still, because you still don't know what's going to happen. There's all these rumors. People are living in Italy for years, they're losing their pasovia, like what's going to happen. But at the same time, there's nothing to do. There's no work. All you have to do is hang out, and wait. And so you every night outside of the little kitchen on our floor, there would be like a big party of all the grown-ups. I don't know if they're probably drinking, and they were probably smoking and hanging out. And I had my own little crew of friends, and we would be out every night, loitering in the park. That was very much fun. People were from all over, Ukraine, Moldova. There was a whole clan, I think I discussed it in the book, of people from Bukharian Jews who were completely different from, us Ashkenazis. And we were kind of like, are we really related genetically? Like, this is incredible,
Was this the first time you've met Bukharian Jews? Or have you known that there are such people as Bukharian Jews?
No, honestly, I didn't know that there were such people until like high school, probably. I didn't make the connection. But we had vacationed on the Black Sea, right? So we've seen like Georgians and Abkhazians, and these people were kind of like more like them than anything else. They ate the same food. They didn't eat, our like see-through borscht, so the Leningrad borscht that has no meat in it, any person from Ukraine would like crucify us for that, for calling it borscht. So then you do make very fast friends. You have to, because you really don't have anyone else to depend on, and people end up living together because you had to find living quarters in Italy. So we were very close with the family. And then they ended up in New York when we ended up in Boston, and we kept in touch at first. But then, and this is also touched on in the book, they, the woman, even though she wasn't Jewish and her husband was only half Jewish, she became Orthodox Jewish. She converted completely and became very, very religious, very, very serious. And we lost touch after a couple of years, unfortunately, and I have not found them on Facebook. And I honestly don't remember. She had a son with whom I was really good friends, but he had a different last name, and I don't remember what it was, or I would look for him, but I haven't.
So you mentioned a little bit about the Jewish experiences along the way, right? So were there any Jewish experiences in Vienna and in and then in Italy. And how did you relate? How did your parents relate to it?
Well, so yeah, I mean, we were there, because ostensibly we were leaving so that we could be ourselves, be our Jewish selves, whatever that meant. And, it was also known to Hayes and to the officials that we had been deprived of our Jewish identity. And so I laughed and I said they were trying to convert us, but no, they were trying to reconnect us, to re-educate us back to our Jewishness. And a lot of people, they really felt it and they found their faith. I don't think that was necessarily true in my family, but there was definitely efforts to be made. I don't know if anybody remembers the organization in Vienna called Yeva. Do you guys remember Yeva? They were a Jewish philanthropic organization that organized, I called them Jewish classes. So I would go to this Yeva school 3 days a week and they would teach us Jewish songs. And then they taught us about the holidays. Like I think it was the first time I learned about Hanukkah there, about the candles. And they took us on an outing to a temple in Vienna. So they would come around. I mean, they were kind of like, they must have been, I don't know what kind of organization they were. I tried to Google them and I couldn't find them, but they were some sort of, I don't want to say they proselytized, but they actually came around like to the pensions, to the hotels where the immigrants were housed, and they would like bring materials. I think I still have Old Testament for kids with pictures of all the plagues. It's like kind of disturbing, but I have it. And they tried to like reconnect you. And my parents, I'm going to read the passage now. So they said they tried to avoid them because they didn't want to hurt their feelings, because they had not been struck by faith 2 weeks into our immigration. But some people really got into it. So Tanya Scalet, which was the woman that we made friends with and ended up living with in Italy, she was very much into it. So then the Yeva people took us to a synagogue one evening during Shabbat services. We walked to the synagogue because they told us we weren't allowed to take a train or transportation. We were hushed, we were shy, we didn't know what to expect. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Nothing like the gaudy beauty of the Hermitage or the grandeur of the St. Isaac's Cathedral in Leningrad. And yet, undoubtedly, it held its own. There was intricate woodwork and paneling contrasted with dimly glittering silver of various Jewish artifacts displayed behind glass. The ceiling was adorned in blue velvet with a gilded trellis pattern. The sconces were in the shape of a curved 9-candle chandelier. And our guide said, "That's the tree of life." Very well-dressed ladies and gentlemen filed in, nodding at each other, smiling and wishing each other good Shabbos. And we stood by the wall, completely uninitiated into the Shabbos procedures at the temple. We didn't know what to do with ourselves, so we just hung back and observed. "Look," my mom said, nudging me, "look at all these beautiful people all together in one place, and they're all Jewish." So I think that was the one major realization that we had, that it was okay to all be in one place and be Jewish and be nicely dressed and be good looking and be celebrating a Shabbos. That was kind of an amazing experience.
Looking back now at those experiences in Vienna,
Yeah.
did it have an effect on the Jewish identity? Or most people still feel that people were trying to proselytize and there was something that didn't quite sit well with the Soviet
I really think it depends on I really think it depends on the individual. There are plenty of people who have joined their Jewish communities and have found their faith, and there's plenty of people who have stayed secular. I think it really depends but as far as whether or not we as Jewish Russian immigrants have a Jewish identity, I don't think anybody could argue with that. There's another passage I wanted to read. This is actually attributed to my mom entirely.
Please.
And we have this discussion, we still have this discussion frequently. This is my mom talking to me, okay? "I don't need to be kosher to remember I'm Jewish," my mom says. "I've had plenty of reminders my whole entire life. My face is a reminder. Look, when I married Volodya, who is not Jewish, I kept my first married name, Kaganovich, which is as Jewish as can be, out of personal pride, so that people wouldn't get the idea that I was hiding my Jewishness behind a Russian name. Every year on the first day of school, because my mom was a teacher, on the first day of school, I proudly wrote my entire name on the blackboard, including the patronym, Anna Aronovna Kaganovich. And my non-intelligentsia, simple-minded, technical high school students would turn red and giggle and make fun. What's that? Andronovna, Alexandrovna? Until I would deadpan, no, Aronovna, because Aaron is a very common Jewish name. At that point, they get astonished and shut up because even they had standards. Like, they were fine with profanity in the classroom, but come on, like, who says Jewish out loud? Let's not mess with this one. And I had the stamp in my passport, just like every one of us did. Section 5, Jew. And I had my face, my Yiddish shapunim. Who needed a yellow star in Soviet Union? I didn't. And I didn't need to practice customs that meant nothing to me because I didn't grow up with them either. So I tell this to people who don't understand what a secular Jew is. It's not just religion. It's in your blood. It's on your face. It's who you are when, not if, when they come for us again. They are not going to care whether we were practicing Jews, Orthodox Jews, Reform Jews, or secular Jews. As long as they're Jews, they're taking us. That's my very pessimistic view of the world.
I have to say that part of the book struck me the most.
Really?
And even though I tend to lead a more traditional lifestyle,
Yeah.
I could so relate to that. And, it was written beautifully. So thank you. Yeah, we have a comment in the chat, dark, right? Yes, indeed, that those were some dark moments, right? We had to live through. So if you don't mind, let us move on to a happier topic. Made me tear up. Yep, certainly.
And I just want to say that, again, these were not things that I realized as a child. This is something I realized in the last maybe 5 years with all the things that have been happening in this country, the Pittsburgh shooting, et cetera, et cetera. Like these are things that I've come to as an adult. So
do you feel Americans and American Jews understand what we are trying to say? Like, if you try to explain now, how are we Jewish? What makes us Jewish? Do you feel we are able to deliver the message, or they are able to receive the message?
I think it depends. It depends. I think that people don't fully understand that it's more than just a religion. I think you have to be Jewish to understand that. I think, non-Jews don't have trouble with that. But this idea of it doesn't matter what kind of Jew we are, that actually came from from a discussion with an American who said that, he's exposing in the discussion on whether or not it was okay to discuss the Holocaust with children. He says that absolutely they need to know, because if it happens again, when it happens again, he needs them to know why. And so I thought about that long and hard. This was a doctor I used to work with. And it made a big impact. So
my good friend often says, you can't un-Jew yourself.
Can't enjoy yourself.
Right. So,
exactly.
This is something that I could certainly relate to. So let's move on to happier subjects, happier moments in the book, and there are certainly plenty. So the most exciting moment during your immigration journey, most memorable, most fun, was it when you finally got the Barbie, or was it something?
Oh, there were so many. I mean, Vienna, I think Vienna was probably the best. I don't remember one truly bad moment in Vienna. It was Christmas time. It was magical. Everywhere there was crystals and lights, and the weather was beautiful, like fluffy snow, and all the museums were free the week between December and, Christmas and New Year. So we went to all the fancy museums. We saw everything. We didn't have to pay rent. So whatever money the highest gave us was plenty for us to eat. We explored all the new variety food. There was yogurt. I do remember being really sad looking at the toy stores because the displays were so colorful, and I really wanted something and couldn't have it because obviously we didn't have any money. I didn't mark the passage, but there is one where we get a cake. My mom and I finally decide to splurge, and we got this pastry at a pastry shop. We didn't tell my dad because he was the one that was really scared to spend money. So we got this pastry and unwrapped it and ate it on the sidewalk.
Ate it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my American friends who read this book said, did they not have pastries in Russia? And I said, they did. They did. We used to go to this restaurant called Sever. They had these amazing pastries, but there was, you could have that, but then you end up in Vienna and all of a sudden you're like the orphan in Charles Dickens, like, standing outside the window of the restaurant, like, that looks good. What is that? And so, after a month of this, when you finally get your hand on this magical pastry that's wrapped in the gold ribbon and they don't shoo you away from the store. You walk in the store and they don't tell you like, go away. It's it's exciting. It's an exciting moment. So that's why it sticks out in my mind. And then we got to Italy, and Italy. So, it's different. My papa says it's probably the best time of his life. He was there for 4 months, I think. And he says it's like the best. Italy is his happy place. Whenever he thinks of a happy place, he thinks of Italy. For me personally and my family, it's like the unhappy place. Because it was the very end, money was running out. The money that they were giving us was very little. We had to pay the rent. We were hungry. We were sick. It was cold. The Italian people were sick of us in the town. They were sick of the onslaught of these refugees that hung around their town and spent no money. And it was a tough time. And people were getting antsy because they were waiting. We didn't know what was happening. We were the very, very last wave. So Italy was different, I would have to say.
I hear it quite a lot. And people who don't understand say, "Oh, Italy must have been, paradise, Italian vacation, right? Rimsky canicoli."
Oh.
And many people say, "No, you don't understand. This was uncertainty and worry and anxiety and
hunger and not feeling well is what I remember. We stayed in this apartment that was, it was a seaside town. So it was like a vacationing apartment. It wasn't winterized. It was February. It was all tile. It was constantly cold. It was probably lovely. It was probably lovely in the summer, when you come from the beach and it's cool and there's a veranda. But for us, we were freezing. It was humid. The water was bad. It was giving everyone ulcers. I had a cough. It was like, by the time that the assurances started coming, we were more than ready to leave, I think.
Have you been back to Austria or to Italy?
Yes, I've been back to both. I went back to Austria with my parents. It was like a special trip we wanted to take, just us. And Vienna was not what I had in my head. So we went in September, and I have to say that I didn't remember any of it. So, we came this time as well-established, well-off tourists. We discussed where we're going to stay. Are we going to stay at a hotel? Should we stay at an Airbnb? We set a budget. I said, I don't want to, this is too low of a budget because I don't want to sleep on the couch. Let's raise the budget. We raised the budget. We got this Airbnb in this fancy part of town by the fancy clock that walks around, and I don't even remember that clock for the first time around. And when we were walking around Vienna, I don't remember about the rings. I did not remember the main cathedral. I vaguely remembered the marketplace because I saw the green booths and I was like, I think I remember these green booths because they used to sell imitation Barbies here. And I really wanted one, but I don't remember it. We must have been there, right? I must have been there. I don't remember it at all. So I kept waiting for some sort of like emotional thing to happen to me in Vienna. And it was a gorgeous city. We were visiting it like tourists. It was beautiful. And then one day we separated from the rest of our group and decided to go visit the old neighborhood. And that's when all the feels hit me all at once, because that neighborhood, I remembered, and it looked exactly the same. Exactly the same. The canal, the benches, we even found our building. We were stood outside, like kind of like loitered outside the building until we saw somebody going in, and we were like, can we go in behind you? Because my mom, she likes to talk to everybody. So she told them our whole life story. Oh, we were immigrants. We stayed. This used to be a pension. And he's like, yeah, come in, come on in. He was Greek, I think. Would you like to use the restroom? Apparently it had been converted into condos. And then I go around the corner and Kindermodden is still there. That's when I started crying. I saw it, it was still there. It had a sign in the window that says "Wir schließen," which I had to Google, and I looked it up, and it means we're closing.
Closing.
But they weren't closed yet, right? And they apparently waited 28 years for us to come and like say goodbye before they closed. I thought that was kind of, so we kind of walked around, looked around, and then went back to our fancy Airbnb.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite something.
Now, Italy, I went back to with my husband for our 15th anniversary trip, and I did not go back to the town where we stayed because I don't know, the memories were bad. And Italy really is magic. You know what? It really is magic. And it's too bad that we didn't get to appreciate it the first time. One thing that did happen, so I'd like to read this passage, is so, you know, my papa and his family and my son and us were overlapped by about a week. And he had already had his assurance and he got money, or by 2 weeks or something like that. And he was leaving to Philadelphia. He was leaving his apartment and we needed to find an apartment. So he said, why don't you just take my apartment? We're leaving. We had to overlap by 1 day inside this apartment. So it was my papa, his wife, my 2-year-old half sister, us, the three of us, and then the Scalets, the four of them who were gonna, you know, live with us or be our roommates. And we all slept in this one apartment. My 2-year-old sister slept in a suitcase. And then my papa left. But before he did that, he took me on a trip to Vienna. I'm sorry, to Rome proper. And he wanted to show me St. Peter's Cathedral. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to read that passage.
Please.
So being from Leningrad, I was no country bumpkin and no stranger to beautiful architecture and grandiose buildings, especially since my mom had gone on a rampage right before we left and had dragged me all around the city to make sure I memorized the sites. Dochinka, this is St. Isaac's, the one with the dome and the portico. And this is the Kazan, the one with the columns. Repeat after me. Yes, Mom. All the churches back home, though, were desecrated. And while left standing, they were converted into museums, if they were lucky, or storage warehouses, if not. St. Isaac's claim to fame was the Foucault pendulum, and the Kazan was the Museum of Atheism. The official name was the Religious History and Atheism Museum. Leave it up to the Soviets to create such a blatant display of irony without a hint of actual irony. But my dad took me to St. Peter's Basilica, and that was something else entirely. I had never been inside an actual active church before, although I had seen one once while on vacation in Latvia with my grandmother. There had been a small whitewashed church in one of the little towns we'd visited, and as we strolled by, I'd crane my neck to get a peek at the ancient kerchiefed women who were praying inside. But my grandmother ushered me along and said not to stare, so I didn't get to quench my curiosity. Inside the basilica, people were walking around by themselves and in bunches, checking out this or checking out that, snapping photos. A group of what looked like high school students stood by a large bronze statue listening to a wildly gesticulating guide holding an American flag on a pole so they don't get lost, I thought. The main apse was roped off. And my, che successo, Papa asked the guard. C'è una messa, said the guard. There's a mass, Papa said, explained to me. People are praying, I said. It is a mass, he said. Right now? I said, like for real? They're praying while infidel tourists such as myself are gawking at their sacred paintings and statues? Papa was on a mission. He and my mom seemed to have that in common, the desire to imprint information on my brain. Look at the chiaroscuro, realize the significance of the ever so expensive purple Egyptian granite, note the figures in motion. It's pure Baroque. All of it, for whatever reason, didn't make much of an impression on me. Beheaded babies and little birds and fake rays of sun, really? Except the dome. That dome, the dome I could never forget. When I found myself under it, I threw my head back and slowly spun around. I tried to read the letters. S. Petri Gloriae. There were tiny little figures scurrying around above like ants on the gold letters, and it took me a second to realize they were people doing work, maybe cleaning or restoring. I couldn't help but let my mouth drop open. The letters didn't look that big at first, but they were suddenly massive, immeasurable in comparison to the ant people crawling around them. This is huge, I whispered to Papa. He nodded. Standing inside the basilica, you don't realize how enormous it is. The columns and the domes, the reliefs, the monuments, the tiles, the frescoes, the Latin writing near the ceiling, all of it seemed to combine into an architectural symphony, one phenomenal, perfectly proportioned structure. I couldn't appreciate how vast it actually was, not until it was put in perspective next to something or someone else, until that something or someone else became hopelessly dwarfed in its proximity. The realization came over me gradually as I stood under the dome, slowly introducing me to this odd sensation of my own personal insignificance before timeless grace and greatness. I don't know that I can remember another time in my life when I discovered an essential truth for myself in this poignant of a way, that we are but ants in the face of eternity. You can like opulence or you can dislike opulence, but you cannot argue with Michelangelo. So what I was going to say is that when I went to Italy the second time when we visited the Vatican, I had the exact same reaction as I did 30 years
Can't
before.
argue with Michelangelo, right?
Yeah, like the Baroque church is like granite, gold, birds, crystal, people like this Pope, that Pope, everybody's got a monument. But then you go and you stand under the dome and you're like, huh.
Yeah.
Like it's incredible.
Thank you, Sasha. If you don't mind, I want to move our conversation a little bit into
Sure.
into the book itself, right?
Okay.
So, who did you write the book for? Was there one person in mind that you had when you were decided to write it, and when you were writing it, and what exactly did you want to tell them? You know,
Well, I started writing the book because I was reading a lot of immigrant lit from like the late 70s, early 80s, like Steingart, Davlatov. I was like, where are all the writers of my generation? Where are they? Why isn't anybody writing? I'm gonna write it. So I sat down and I started writing. I just said, it's a labor of love. I'm just gonna write down our stories so we have something to remember, because there were so many funny stories. I'm gonna write down ours. I'm gonna talk to Papa. I'm gonna talk to other people. I'm gonna write down their stories. And then maybe I'll like print it out and put it on a shelf. But as I kept going, it seemed more and more important to make it into an actual, they just seemed to coalesce into a narrative, into a tale. And by that point I said, you know what, I think this is important. This is important because it's a tribute to my mom and Volodya, who brought me here with perseverance and hope and, struggle. And two, it's something for my children so that they know what we all went through and have something to connect with. So my mom and I were discussing this as I was preparing for this talk. And she said, one of the like fundamental abuses of its people that the Soviets imposed on them was to take away their roots, because people were very secretive about where they came from, because God knows what might be considered bad and what might render you enemy of the people. What did you come from? A line of nobility? Bad. Did you come from a line of dissidents? Bad. Were you kulak? Were your ancestors kulaki? Bad. Are you Jewish? Bad. So, did you come from a shtetl and you were a practicing Jew? Bad. So you tried to separate yourself from your past, and you basically ended up like I think my grandmother didn't know who her grandparents were. She couldn't go that far back beyond, into her family tree. She moved to the city when she was 9 in 1931, and that's all, or not even 9, 7, and that's all she knows. And I wanted to be the opposite of that. I wanted to create, my husband, on the other hand, who is Basque, he knows his entire generation. In order to be considered Basque, he has to know 8 last names.
Wow.
So he has to go back 8 generations, and he can, and I thought, that was pretty amazing. And I wanted my kids to have something to look at when they get a little bit older, so that they know what the history is behind me being here.
Wow.
Plus, I wanted to share it with, other people that don't know what we all went through. I don't think Americans know how we get here. I don't think they realize that it's, not just hopping on a plane and ending up in America.
Yeah,
There's
right.
a whole thing to it.
So you are a doctor by training, right?
Yes.
Do you identify yourself as a Russian Jewish writer?
I mean, insofar as I identify as a writer, sure. I'm a Russian writer, sure. Yeah.
So in the last several years, there have been several books published,
Yeah.
specifically about Vienna and Italy experience. So
So there has
maybe it has to do with the amount of time that has passed since the immigration, that we have a generation of people who were children or teenagers at the time who are now ready to to publish quality works
absolutely.
about this
I was
experience.
just gonna say that now we're finally old enough to like, create works. I actually, when I was writing this, as I did a little search of literature, I found a book called a Bear, a Backpack, and 8 Crates of
Yeah,
Vodka.
Lev Galinkin. Yeah, yeah.
And I read it and I panicked because I said, people are gonna think I plagiarized because so many of the experiences were so similar, down to like, I mean, down to the 8 crates of vodka, and the fact that they took a Baltic vacation before they left. Apparently that was a thing that was in my book as well. And I was panicking. And then I decided, you know what, but his book is different. He's a boy, for one thing.
It's
He's
a
from
boy's experience, right? Yeah.
yeah, and his experience was vastly different than mine. He had a lot of abuse as a Jewish child in Kharkov. As I mentioned, my book was completely sheltered. It was a different experience. But yeah, I did get scared for a second there,
So
thinking,
so
what's the point of telling the story if everybody knows the story?
and besides telling the story of immigration, both of these books are unique stories of coming of age, right?
Yes,
A boy, and you were as a almost teenage girl, right,
yeah.
coming of age. So if if you could tell us a little bit how does your personal story and coming of age fit into this whole.
I mean, when you're 11, so I was 11, I was just starting to, my myself was changing, my life around me was changing already. You become aware of the boys, something's going to happen, you're on the precipice. And then they also take you out of your familiar environment. So not only are you on the precipice of a major personal change, there's a major external change happening. So, the book is in large part about how one deals with the personal change in a constantly unstable, uncertain environment. And I was hoping that through telling that story, I could also, show some of that as well. Kind of, watching what happens around me and becoming slowly aware of things that are just outside my own little persona.
Mm, thank you. What is the most interesting reaction you've had to your book by other people?
Well, that other people bought it and liked it. Like, I thought this was going to be just my mom. So I'm very excited that people actually want to read it and that they like it.
Gotcha.
Did
So
anybody else find the story interesting or relatable? That's very exciting for me.
so friends, in the chat you will see information about how the book can be purchased, and we encourage you to obviously to purchase the book and read it. It was very enjoyable. And Sash, I think we should open it up to people,
Absolutely.
right? So friends, we are going to allow you to unmute yourself, and if you have a question, please go ahead. You can either raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself and go for it. Okay. All right, let's see. All right. All right. Please go ahead if somebody. All right.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, of course.
Please
Sasha,
go
did you
ahead.
have a chance to come back, travel back to Leningrad, St. Petersburg?
So we went back when I graduated college in the year 2000,
And
which
how it was?
21 years ago, which is kind of insane. It was similar to going back to Vienna, where I felt like a complete, I mean, it had only been 10 years between leaving and coming back, and it was already a vastly different city. It had been I want to say westernized, but it had been cleaned up. It was gleaming. It was beautiful. It was different. We specifically didn't go to the communist block, so we stayed around the center. And I really felt like a tourist. All of that effort that my mom made, look, a Gladmiro taster, look, this, I didn't, even walking into to see the Winter Palace was like a big surprise. And then this year was going to be our big year to go back, 2020. And then of course, COVID happened. So we didn't go. So that's in the books, in the plans to go, because you know, my husband, he really wants to see where we're from.
Mhm.
So, yes.
Yes, Anna, please go ahead. Yes, please unmute yourself, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I want to say there is a person here who really, really important and essential to our first
Oh,
year
this is my mom, everybody, just in case you're wondering. This is
in America, Carol.
Aloida.
Was the first real American we met. Carol, you remember Sasha at 11. I want you to say something. Carol, you here?
Carol has her camera off. Hi, Carol.
Ah,
So
Carol.
Carol was, so
You
when-
are the only one beside us who remembers Sasha at 11.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I remember Sasha. Oh, I
so
remember
Carol,
going
just to
to
give
your-
everyone an idea, when we first came here, were you a volunteer, Carol,
I
or
was
did you
a
take
volunteer.
English Russian courses?
I was trying to,
We were like, she was teaching me English, and for some reason she wanted to learn Russian. 30 years later, I still don't know why.
For some unknown reason. And she still does.
I still try.
So, and that's the first real American we met. I just want to introduce you because
Oh,
you're the only
thank
one who
you.
remembers Sasha at 11.
I do. And I
Welcome,
remember-
Carol.
I remember junior high graduation.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. You were
I
there.
remember
right.
high school graduation. I remember parties in your basement apartment
Oh, the basement
with
apartment.
many Russian speakers and yeah.
Welcome. So,
Apartment
Yeah.
features prominently in the book if you guys buy it. The basement apartment was important.
The basement apartment.
That's
Sasha,
Thank
so
you,
you
Carol, for everything. And the first Thanksgiving, by the way.
The first
First Thanksgiving, first lobsters ever. It was you. Yeah.
And it's been a long
we remember,
friendship.
we remember that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sasha, so you write with such love and devotion of your parents.
Mhm.
You know, if they were writing the book, right? I wonder how would they. I assume they've read the book, right?
Yes.
Right.
Not
And,
only have they read it, but my mom, she was my
right.
most
Do you
important
disagree sometimes about something in the book? Like your parents read the book and said, no, that's not how it was, or they saw
Actually,
it differently or from a different perspective.
So I wrote the book. My mom here, she was one of my most important beta readers. A beta reader is, you know, when you've got your book and then you want to show it to someone to get like a first look and see what they say. So my mom was my most important beta reader. But when the book was done and almost finished, I sent it to Papa in Philadelphia and asked him what he thought. And he did not like it at all. He said exactly what you said. He said, that's not how it was.
That's not how it was, right?
It's not how to remember.
Yeah, and I was like, well, for who? But actually one of the stories in the book is his. I've placed myself there, but I said I wanted to collect immigration stories from other people, but he had very interesting stories from Italy. So I borrowed some of the elements of his immigration story to include into my book as well. Like, you know, the dancing with Guido, the coffee shop owner, those are partly his story. But he disagreed with me. He didn't enjoy the humor. Like he I don't think saw the humor in it. For him, it was an awful experience, you know, right up until Italy. So,
Thank you.
yeah. I don't know. Mom, do you disagree?
Please. We have a question from Olga. Olga, please go ahead and just make sure you unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for this talk / presentation. It's thoroughly enjoyable, and you speak beautifully. And Roma, thank you for your wonderful questions as well. And I have two questions, more or less. They don't really relate to each other. But one question, and if I missed it, I apologize. If you said it and I missed it, how long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, like 5 years. No, I started just writing down stories in like 2015, and I would just write. But with all the revisions and editing, you know, it didn't get published until 2020. It was written, but I was still working on it.
Yeah, no, of course, it's the process. I see.
Tell them how many revisions you had.
From the conception to the
Yeah,
moment it was published, I meant.
yeah.
And you were only 11. I left when I was 21, but very infantile and very scared and back then. So you had your childhood your children's memories. And
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of your memories came back, and I guess it's the question, came back from, and from the stories that you relived, and it surfaced in your memory. Is that how it happened?
Interesting you should say that. I had diaries. When I was 7, my Volodya brought home this notebook and said, here, entertain yourself, because I was sick at home with the flu or with something, and he brought me this notebook, and I started keeping a diary. And I kept the diary faithfully until I was probably 20. So throughout all of that, turmoil from before leaving and Vienna and Italy and the first few years in America, I wrote it all down. I mean, whether or not it's like legible or understandable, a lot of it's child speak, oh my God, but there's certain things that I wrote down with amazing detail, like what happened with my friends and museum trips and stuff like that. So a lot of what you're saying are memories. I went back and I looked through my diaries, and I was able to recreate things that happened. And then I would go to my mom and say, what was this about? And then she and I would think about it and try to remember what happened and talk about it. And then I would say, like, I remember going to Yeva and they gave us free stuff or something. Do you remember that? And she'd say, yes. And then she would describe it to me. Yes, it was in the house on this street, and you would come and they would bring out bags and you would dig through the bags, and somehow it wasn't at all embarrassing. And we would recreate the story together.
Fantastic that you did that, and certainly kudos to your parents who exposed you to this. And
Yeah.
And I that was actually sort of 2 parts of one question. I have another, if I may.
Of course.
For me, immigration was a very traumatic experience, and so traumatic that I lost a huge part of my memories. So I was wondering if you had, like, now you partially answered it. You had things written down, you recorded a lot of it, so you probably. For me, I had to, over the years of immigration and adapting to this new life, they started to come back slowly, and not all are restored, actually.
Oh, but if you were 21, you're basically kind of like, late adolescence, early adult. I think that experience would be more traumatizing than to an 11-year-old, because I had no perspective yet. All I knew is finally we were leaving. My parents say it's good, very exciting, let's go. But I didn't have any of the stress associated with it, and all the things that I heard that were stressful didn't have the context that my parents had. You can ask them if they have any memory lapses. I will tell you though that there have been stressful times in my life where I have repressed memories, so I don't think that's uncommon. And I do wish I had diaries times, but I don't anymore. So
thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Friends, please go ahead if we have any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. No. Okay. No. Sasha, any plans for future books?
I have one in the works. It's actually more of a novel than it is a memoir, but it's what I would call autofiction, which is like fiction, but it's based on something that actually happened. It can be viewed as almost like a sequel. It's about a teenager who's in the refugee community in Boston. So it can be viewed as a sequel of this book, I suppose, like 5 years later.
Thank you. We are certainly looking forward to reading that.
The first draft is complete and just went to an editor, and I don't know what's going to happen with it after that. So.
Excellent. Friends, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank Sasha.
Thank you so much for having me.
This was very interesting. I enjoyed the book thoroughly, and friends, strongly encourage you to buy and read the book.
Most surprising reaction to the book. Thank you, Rom.
You forget your worries and troubles, and you are in that world of Sasha's for a couple of hours. So thank you all very much.
Thank you guys for coming and for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
for organizing and inviting us.
Thank you, Roma, for organizing. You've been so
Thank you,
so
Roma.
good to me while I was nervous.